I spent 2 days researching everything that confuses people about bass amps and cabs. I then compiled this long list of questions and then sat down with one of the UK's top amp and cab experts, Alex, the founder of Barefaced. Now, just to be clear, this video isn't sponsored by Barefaced. I'm not sponsored by Barefaced. I bought my cab, which is back here, the one I'm currently using, at full price from the Bass Gallery in Camden. Now, after my old amp blew mid-sound check a few months ago, I was on the lookout for a new amp, and I first heard about Barefaced. I kind of always knew about them, but people were raving about them at an event that I was helping run with Scott's Bass Lessons, who you'll probably be familiar if you're watching this video on YouTube. We had like 50 or so students fly out from all over the world, and we had some amazing guest artists like Paul Geary, Ian King. We even had the Gorillaz bass player there, of course, Scott and Ian. And everyone at that event seemed to be like raving about Barefaced cabs. Particularly, I had a chat with like Paul, and he was saying that's what he used, and pairing that with an Aguilar head. So I went to the Bass Gallery in Camden, which if you're based in London, you'll know this bass shop. But yeah, after A/B testing this cab with some other cabs, that it was a clear winner for me. Anyway, so I bought that there. That was one of their older models, I think, anyway. And I paired that with the new Aguilar Tonehammer 500. And it's been working really well for a lot of the stuff that I've had to do. Whether it's just like in-ears and I'm just using it kind of like as a monitor and just to dial in my tone, or whether I'm just using it as the standalone like kind of bass amp. It's been great. So after I bought that cab in the Bass Gallery, they were saying that Barefaced, the company, or the headquarters, was actually based in Brighton, which is only about an hour and a half or so from where I'm based in London. So I drove down one day, spent a lovely day in Brighton with the team. The team were awesome, really friendly, incredibly welcoming. And then Alex and I actually got to sit down and have, it was like a 90-minute conversation, which I think I've managed to edit down. But there was loads of valuable moments in this conversation. There's so much information in this video, and I wanted to release this video last week, but I realized that some of this info could be super overwhelming. It's easy to forget as well, and once I asked Alex a question, he kind of really dives deep into the subject. So instead of releasing it last week, I spent a few days putting together a free like PDF workbook, basically summarizing everything that we talked about. So all the questions I asked, you'll have the question and then a summary inside that PDF, which I think is really useful. So if you do want to kind of revisit something or reference something when you go and buy your next amp or next cab, or you just want to learn more about it, you can grab the PDF using the link below so you can use it as a reference in the future. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this deep dive into the world of bass amps and cabs. So yeah, the first one was that came up quite a lot. Like, what's the difference between heads, cabs, combos? I think people get confused with the whole world.
So heads is your amplifier, it's your electronics. It's what you plug into, it plugs into the mains. It usually has a bunch of knobs on it. It's got the preamp, which deals with the low-level signal from your bass, and then that deals with most of the coloration, and then it's got the power amp in there. That's the power stage, which is normally solid state nowadays, but if it's something like an SVT, that's a bunch of valves and an output transformer. And then the cab is the box with the speaker in, and a combo has got both combined. So head and cab in one. And the thing to remember about all of this is the only thing that makes any sound is the speaker in the cab.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's everything else is just a wiggly electrical line. You don't hear it until it gets to a speaker.
Right. And then that's why you guys deal with speakers, as that's like almost arguably probably one of the most important parts of like for generating the sound.
Yeah, well, it's the only thing that actually makes any sound. And although the speaker moves to make sound, the speaker moves inside the cab, and the cab basically controls how the speaker behaves in lots of complicated ways.
So when would you, like, from a player's perspective, when would you get a combo, or when would you kind of decide to buy a combo or a separate head and cab?
I mean, combos always struck me as more of a beginner thing. They're not entirely. And occasionally you get the odd mad combo. I think Ashdown did one for Mark King back in the 90s, which was an 8x10 combo.
All right, okay.
So it's like a 500 watt or a 1000 watt head.
Mark King's not a beginner.
No, he's not a beginner, and it was an 8x10, so it was 4 foot high.
Yeah,
so
wow.
I think that was just them having a laugh.
Yeah.
And then actually there's combo lurking there in the corner, which we're just borrowing for a bit of demoing, which is a Mark-based Jeff Berlin combo, and clearly Jeff isn't a beginner either.
Yeah.
The problem I would always see with a combo is that if the head has a sound, and the speaker is going to have a sound, because you can't really make a speaker that doesn't have a sound, then you're tied to that pairing.
Yeah.
And I just think that's inflexible.
Yeah, like
I think we've been looking more into active cabs recently, and that what we're trying to do is pairing a low coloration speaker, high accuracy cabinet, with essentially a power amp. So then you're going, well, I'm going to DI, I'm going to run off a pedal board, whether it's analog or digital or whatever. That's my sound, and I want something that turns my sound up on stage, turns it from an electrical signal into a loud signal. At that point, I feel that combining the power amp and the speaker in a unit makes a lot of sense. But I wouldn't want to be, active speaker essentially, but I personally wouldn't want to be tied to a head and cab that are all in one, because by changing the head or changing the cab, you can change so much. You can have a small head, which you can then pair with a small cab, but you can put that small head on a big cab and play a much, much bigger gig.
And even have two cabs as well.
Yes, exactly. So you can add an extension cab. Or the other thing you can do is you could have a cab that can sound really nice in the studio, and you can be doing really vintage sounds. Say, I use something old like a Selmer treble and bass or something, 50 watt head. You're going to struggle to gig with that, but it might sound great in the studio. You can then put your 500 watt solid state portable head on top of it for gigging. So I like that flexibility.
That's what I'm thinking about doing actually, and that's kind of why I'm here, was like have something small in the studio and then have something. I mean, recently I got the Aguilar Tone Hammer 500 watt head, and then that kind of gives you a lot of different options, I guess. Yeah. So there's no real advantage to getting a combo, maybe like just practicality?
Well, there's a couple less leads. One less lead to plug in?
Yeah, one less lead.
One less lead to plug in.
Yeah, saving time, maybe, yeah. Okay, cool. Next question that came up a lot as well is like, what does watts mean? How many watts would you recommend as well for different musical situations? Say like small kind of coffee shop type gigs, kind of medium gigs like maybe pubs, weddings, that kind of venue, and then also like larger shows like theatres or festivals.
Well, I mean, simplistically, watts is a measure of output power of your amplifier. It's not a measure of the output of your speaker. So we make really efficient speakers because efficiency, well, let me put it another way. Speakers are really, 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 really inefficient, okay?
Yeah.
So like a car engine's not particularly efficient, but it's about, what is it, the diesel engine running well, 30% efficient, something like that. That's why cars, diesel and petrol cars are nice and warm in the winter, because you've got just a lot of waste heat to use. A speaker is a few percent efficient at best, right? So if you've got a 100 watt speaker or a 100 watt amp going into a 100 watt speaker, the amp can be putting out 100 watts. The speaker, if say it's a really efficient speaker, it might be 3% efficient for us, which is appalling efficiency for anything else, but really good efficiency for a speaker. Wow. That means you get 3 watts of sound and 97 watts of heat.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is rubbish.
Yeah.
So you can see that, and if you have a less efficient speaker, so the difference in efficiency, if you go down 3 decibel sensitivity, that's like halving your efficiency. So it gets really, really bad. So you can end up saying, oh yeah, 100 watts will get you this loud. It won't, because it's all about conversion of that 100 watts of electrical power into acoustic power. And the problem is most of it just comes out as heat.
So like the actual quality of the speaker, you have to kind of think about that when looking at the watts as well.
And there's this thing known as Hoffman's iron law,
Oh yeah.
right? And what Hoffman's iron law says, it's pick any two of three, and the three things are efficient, small, and deep in terms of frequency response. So if you want a speaker that is efficient and goes deep, it can't be small.
Yeah.
And when I say speaker, I mean the size of the system, the size of the box with all the speakers in it. I'm not saying you have to have an 18-inch speaker. You can have an array of 5-inch speakers. It just has to be a big system that's designed to go deep, can be efficient. But you can't make a small speaker that goes deep and is efficient. It's impossible. So you've got this balance of compromises. There's a reason why arrays of subwoofers are huge, at big gigs. But it's also a reason why the subwoofer you might put in your car can go really deep, because it's actually not going that loud, because it doesn't have to fill a big space with sound. But also they tend to be really inefficient. You go into Halfords or wherever, you'll see there's these 2,000 watt subwoofers. They've got a 2,000 watt amp in there, It doesn't make a lot of sound because you've got this really heavy cone that's really inefficient at transferring energy into air. So when it comes to wattage, how many watts you need, it's a really, really, really hard question to answer.
It's not as simple as like just having it on the website.
No,
it's like,
no, absolutely. If you could tell, and the other thing is that if you've got two different bands playing the same genre, there can be a huge difference in loudness between them. You will come across function bands, good function bands as well. Some will just be loud and some will just be quiet. Usually it's determined by the drummer, but sometimes you'll have a bassist or a guitarist who likes to turn up more. Nowadays, you have dB limiters in venues, which cause all sort of havoc because they're usually set really stupidly and they're
Don't
weighted.
get me started on that.
Yeah, so quite comical. But so you'll have bands that vary in loudness. You'll also have bassists who vary in loudness in where they like to sit in the mix. So I'm the sort of bassist who leads the dynamic of a band. So when the band gets quieter, it gets louder, it's getting louder because I'm going up and the drummer's following me.
You're more of like, I've always found that dynamic as well.
Larry Graham or a Bootsy or a Jacko. There's these bassists or a Flick, they're loud in the mix.
Usually there's like a more dominant player, I found, with a drummer and a bass player, and you kind of have to figure that out.
Yeah.
And I found, depending on the drummer I'm playing with, either I'll be like, okay, I'm kind of leading it a little bit, or kind of like, it's like being in a relationship, I guess.
Yeah.
Which it is, I guess, but yeah.
And then the other thing is, so we're wearing two different basses at the moment. You've got the Mustang on, I've got Stingray.
Yeah.
To get a Stingray to sound as loud in a mix as a Mustang, it's probably going to take twice as much power, air movement, because a Stingray goes so much deeper than a Mustang. A Mustang will sound fat, but it will not be moving air deep down like that. And having played on that one, because it's got slightly older, they're not ancient strings, and these are not fresh strings. But essentially, it's more compressed feeling. So the dynamic range of this is bigger, and it goes lower. So you're probably going to need 50% more power to get this as loud as that. Also, someone playing a Mustang is much more likely to be sitting neatly in the mix. What someone playing a Stingray, unless they're going dum dum dum, it's going to be So you've got the variation of how loud the band is for the context, and that's going to vary quite a bit, and then how loud the bass player is within that band.
And what bass they're playing, and
what bass they're playing, so how demanding that is, what their tonal choice is. Because if you choose to sit with, if you're, say, playing through a 210 and you've got a sort of warm, round retro sound, say you've got flats on as well, you're just going to be putting out a load of thumpiness in the kind of 100 hertz region.
Low, mid type.
100 to 300, 400. Whilst I might be in the same band and just deeper and bigger and higher, and I might be using, say, a Super Mini is less efficient than a 210, but also is going to do a slightly different, less coloured sound. And if we went to, say, a Big Baby 3, which is probably out of shot over there, that'll go much deeper and bigger. But it is a bigger cab, so it'll make a bit more in the lows without needing extra power. But I would argue that you could have a 10 dB difference in loudness between two bassists playing the same venue in with the same style of music.
Yeah. And even the
a 10
venue
dB
as
difference
well.
in loudness is a tenfold difference in power.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is why, one of the complications of Barefaced is that we sell direct.
Yeah.
And the emails come in, and basically I answer the inquiries, the technical inquiries, and I've tried to come up with clever ways of solving it. I was thinking of doing a video about how we're using AI now, which is Alex Intelligence, because
Alex
the problem
AI.
is you can't ask the internet because the internet is full of wrong information,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to technical stuff like this. It's all wrong. It's all wrong. So you don't even have to rely on AI hallucinating to get it wrong.
Yeah.
It's just wrong. It's the technical information is just wrong everywhere. So it's hopeless, garbage in, garbage out. So nowadays, and I've been doing this for a long time, that when people email me asking what to get, I email back and say, what's your current rig? Or what rigs have you used in recent years? So even if you don't own one, what have you borrowed? What have you liked about the particular pairings you've used? And what have you disliked?
And those
And
questions
what you've
will give you-
disliked and where you've hit your limitations will tell me the most.
So,
So I don't need to know what you
dislike,
like, I need to know what you don't like. And particularly with rigs where I know you're going to need to be loud, I'll ask about how was it at louder gigs? Did you have enough depth and fatness? So that's talking about the lows, depth being the lower bit and fatness being the kind of higher bit of the lows. Did you have enough punch? So that's kind of your transient ability in the mid-range, I would say. Some people associate it with compression, but I think everyone has their own idea of punch, and you want the right amount of punch, but some people think of it in different ways. But if you had the right punch, you got the right punch for you, and that's all that matters. And was it loud enough?
And
if I know that, then I can figure out what cab will pair with the amp you already have. And sometimes I might have to be like, that amp's not going to cut it. But usually I'll be like, this cab will work for you tonally and in terms of loudness. And then if you want to get a better amp, let's see how your current amp works with this cab, see how loud it gets, see where you get to tonally, because if you change two things at once, it's much harder.
Yeah, because it's not just the loudness, it's the tone, as well.
It's the tone.
What's the most common answer then, when you ask what you're most dissatisfied with your current setup, what's like the most common thing that people say, do you think?
I would say they go in two directions. One is they're moaning about a lack of fatness and depth and stuff. They're talking about thinness, it not being punchy enough, loud enough, because the problem you get with bass rigs, it's not so obvious with guitar, but with bass rigs, essentially the tone falls apart when you push them too hard. And the tone tends to fall apart in that the mids stop punching and slamming like they should, and the lows start going thin and weak.
That's what I was saying earlier with my combo.
Yeah, and that particularly shows up when you're playing loud for longer, because the speakers start getting hot, and then that restricts the efficiency of the amp, because basically the amp's trying to... Your speaker cab might be 8 ohms when it's cold, but once that speaker's hot, it'll be hotter. The resistance goes up in the voice coil, so your 500 watt amp becomes a 250 watt amp, becomes a 100 watt amp. So and then the speaker gets hotter still, and it's just this sort of death spiral of hopelessness. And when it gets hot, the transient response starts falling apart, and so that's how quickly it starts and stops.
Right.
So it starts to get sort of boomy and messy. So that's where you lose your punch.
Yeah.
So you start to lose punch and lows. The other moan is often stuff not sounding as nice. So people complaining stuff is too harsh or lacking in warmth. It tends to go one of two ways.
Okay.
It's either lacking in togetherness in a kind of coherent, deep, clear, fat, whatever way, or it's lacking in sweetness, smoothness, roundness. Yeah. So with the Mustang, you're more likely to be complaining. Well, actually, no. It won't depend on the bass. It'll depend on the context. Yeah.
And also what they're hearing in their head as well, because it's a
Well, that's the other
preference
thing.
thing. Yeah.
Which is why asking someone what they like about their rig and what they dislike about it will tell me what they're hearing in their head and what they want to be hearing in their head.
That's the ultimate goal, anyway.
Because I've noticed, so I've been playing this Stingray as my main bass for, it's come around to 5 years. It hasn't had that many hours on it because it's the one I use here in the studio. But at home I'm playing different basses.
Okay.
Because I'm unplugged at home.
Yeah,
'Cause I
yeah.
just like to just get on with playing music rather than fiddling with gear.
Yeah,
Annoys
yeah.
me.
Because that is
that's
the
work.
ultimate goal as well.
Yeah.
With all of this stuff, the ultimate goal is like what you're hearing in your head.
But I think my head has now linked
Adjusted a little bit.
to this. So it always,
Interesting, yeah.
so my fingers, because I'm someone who moves up and down here, and I pluck in all sorts of different ways. I like to, all my sound starts there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't tend to move the knobs much, but then when I want to change the sound, I'm moving it a long way with the giant pedal board.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So all
Which is
the
down here
subtle
is
tonal
huge.
changes,
Yeah, yeah.
happen off my fingers, and then everything else
Cool.
is giant tonal changes.
I want to double click on a word you mentioned that was also a question I had written down here that people have asked is demystifying this whole like ohms, impedance and all of that.
Yeah, that's a bit of a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Could you break that down? Or just how it works and how it affects the sound and tone?
I mean, don't worry about it tonally. Essentially, with solid state amps, they have a minimum impedance they're happy driving. As the impedance goes up, the amount of power they can put out decreases. But if when the impedance goes down, eventually the amp starts trying to put out more power than it can cope with, and it goes into overcurrent clipping, or it overheats and shuts down and fails. With solid state amps, with valve amps, tube amps, and you'll know if you've got one of those because it'll weigh a disproportionate amount and will break occasionally and cost you more money to run. They're the other way around. They don't like seeing a high impedance. They need to be running lower impedances.
What would a low impedance be?
So you could run, say you've got a 4 ohm minimum solid state amp. Don't run below 4 ohms. It won't like it. Say you've got a valve amp which has got an 8 ohm tap and a 4 ohm tap. If you've got a 2.7 ohm rig, say it's a 4 ohm and 8 ohm cab together, it'll be fine on the 4 ohm tap. It won't care. But I wouldn't put them in series to make like 12 ohms and run it off the 8 ohm tap. It won't like. Actually, it'll be okay with that. You can go sort of 2 to 1 either way. So the valve amp will be fine on an 8 ohm tap running a 16 ohm load and a 4 ohm load, but choose the 4 ohm one rather than the 16 ohm one if you can. They're happier lower than higher. But go beyond that and it gets a bit sad.
Right.
But this is the sort of stuff that it's a real pain because it's really complicated electronics, this stuff. It's a lot of difficult physics, and I just don't think as a musician you should be thinking about it. I think...
I don't think about it as a player.
No,
and
but
that's why I would come to
I don't
you.
think... that's my point. I don't think as someone purchasing gear it should be your problem. I think it's the sort of thing where you should ask whoever is supplying you with the gear, and they should know the stuff. And that is a problem, because I wouldn't expect everyone in a guitar shop to know this.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. So we'll answer your question on that. But and I'll put out videos trying to explain it. But it's if you're not maths inclined, if you're not physics inclined, it's really difficult, boring stuff to get your head around.
So how would you explain it in like the simplest way possible for a player if you're explaining ohms and impedance and what they need?
I'd just ask someone who
You
knows
just
what
ask
they're talking
someone.
about.
Yeah. Fair
Find
enough.
someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Because it's... Yeah.
Okay.
I'll answer your question. If you get stuck, email me. And if I get too many emails with people emailing me about ohms, I'll have to do a video like Ringo saying, no more emails about ohms.
And then I'll link to it or something.
But it's,
You also mentioned solid state tube amps. Just for people that don't know the difference, could you explain those two, apart from the weight that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially it all started with this sort of electronics with thermionic valves, as we call them in the UK, or tubes in the US, and essentially...
So valve amp and tube amp is
Yes, just British versus American words for it. They're an outdated form of electronics before the transistor was invented. So that's semiconductors they became popular in the early 60s. So all your valve radios were, before the 60s, were tubes or valves, as we call them. And then, because they used to be called transistor radios, I can picture my grandfather talking about a transistor radio, because that meant it was this little radio that you could run off a battery.
Kind of changed history a little bit.
Oh,
didn't
absolutely.
It?
And old computers, of course, were on valves.
Yeah. But as far as like, if you're looking at buying a tube amp or a solid state amp as a bass player, what's the difference in tone, sound, or is there any?
Yes.
Yes, to
Yes,
all of it.
there is. There's so many different ways you can do these things. So we've got some a demo board from the guys at Origin Effects who've made. They're really clever. They've got a couple of pedals here, which are analog solid state emulations
Yes.
of valve amps.
Yeah.
And amps which have a lot of valves in them. One of them is the
In a
emulation
tiny
of an
little
SVT, and it's I mean it's quite big as pedals goes, but it's rammed full of gear. And what they've done is they've made analog solid state copies of all the little bits of circuitry that would normally be done with valves, and then added stuff in to sort of copy the valves' non-linearities. I think that's the thing with valves. It's quite easy. I say quite easy to make modern solid state circuitry be really accurate.
Really close to it.
Yeah, so you take, if you've got a signal coming in, you can then make that signal louder without anything weird happening to it. It's straight wire with gain is what audiophiles talk about with hi-fi. You're just trying to get the electricity in, and then you just make it louder to drive your speaker without changing that signal at all. So the signal in and then signal out would just overlay perfectly. One's just a bigger version of the other. It's really, really, really hard to do that with valves. So it's quite annoying in the world of hi-fi. But the non-linearities that valves tend to introduce tend to sound nice for certain sounds. They're very good with a lot of guitar sounds. They're good with some bass sounds, but not all. They're not my bag most of the time, but there's a lot of great bass sounds which have gone through valves. And
the benefit of solid state is what? It's cheaper, lighter.
Cheaper, lighter, more reliable, less.
reliable.
It doesn't need as much servicing, though often less serviceable. So there's two sides
if it does
of that.
break, it's harder to fix a solid state than a
Especially now it's going down to surface mount stuff, but it is so much cheaper to manufacture, uses less resources to manufacture. The only things that wear out in an old solid state amp are the electrolytic capacitors, but they'll last decades, and usually they can be replaced. Whilst in a valve amp, your valves wear out and your capacitors, and then because a valve amp runs hot, the capacitors tend to wear out sooner because they don't like being that warm. So then they need replacing more often. There's a lot of work involved in valves, but they are very cool. They're very romantic.
They're
very
cool.
satisfying.
So
They're fun to play with, and when you overdrive valves, they often sound really good. Whilst when you overdrive solid state stuff, if it's not been designed to overdrive well, it can sound pretty nasty. Funnily enough, we've got a little active cab down here. So
Which I've been trying out for my London gigs when I'm on the tube.
It's really, really fun little thing.
Yeah.
That has a solid state preamp and power amp in it. It was designed to sound just really clean and honest. Turns out it overdrives really nicely. We didn't plan.
Oh, just plugging directly into
Yeah,
it?
if you put a hot signal into it, or you drive it really hard, it overdrives.
Yeah. I mean, having that and then, that's me. Having that and then, what I was thinking and we were chatting about before we hit record, was having that and then potentially like a couple of pedals to shape the tone, like a compressor or, probably just that, to be honest. And then a tuner or something.
No, it's this fun little minimalist solution. So that wasn't designed to sound great when overdriven. That's kind of accidental. And that's, entirely solid state. There's no valves in there at all. But it breaks up really nicely.
But it does it in a pleasing way. Yeah.
And if it sounds good, it is good, yeah?
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I'd love to know what your key takeaway is so far. If you could timestamp that in the comments below, and this lets me and other people know what part of this conversation you found most valuable. The big question that I think we talked about earlier was a difference in like a 10-inch, a 12-inch. Have you got 15 here? Or?
Right, so that is a minefield. What I would say, the difference between a 10-inch and a 12-inch speaker is the 12-inch speaker looks 2 inches bigger. and that is the thing to remember. 12-inch speaker, the problem is, all you see, this is quite dented. This is
So this is
dead.
This
is a 12-inch guitar speaker, but not a bass one. All you see is the size of it, diameter. What actually matters in a speaker is not just the diameter of it, but what this is made of, how thick it is, the damping it is, what this is made of, and how thick it is in its resonant frequencies, what this is like, the surround here. So you've got the cone, the dust cap, the surround. You've then got the spider back in here, that changes the sound, and then you've got the magnet and the magnet system and the pole pieces, and then you've got the voice coil with the windings on it, and that's probably the thing that changes the sound the most. So essentially, the things that determine the sound are all the other things. So I'd say, yeah, the diameter of it is probably, I don't know, 10% of the sound.
Okay.
And everything else contributes just as much.
Right.
So the reason people have tended to go, well, 10-inch bass speakers sound like this, and 12-inch bass speakers sound like that, and 15-inch bass speakers sound like the other, is because if you get a speaker where, and the only thing you change is the diameter, so you essentially use very similar cones and just scale the cones up. Use the very similar surround, use very similar spiders or identical spiders, use the same magnet system, the same motor and everything, and you just scale it up and scale it down. You end up that the 15s sound woollier and deeper.
That's what people usually say.
The 10s sound brighter and tighter and faster, and the 12s are somewhere in between. But that's because all you've done is scaled the diameter and you've not changed anything else.
That's the technical difference, and then as far
but
as
then
sound-wise,
if you look at our two speakers that we use, our history is we actually started out with me trying to design a high accuracy bass cab for me, so that when I played gigs in rubbish little venues, I could DI and the sound coming out of my rig would match the sound coming out of the PA system. And if the PA system was feeble, my rig would be enough to carry the house, so I wouldn't have to DI if the PA system was rubbish, and it would fill the stage and the venue.
Still sound good.
Yeah. And then the best solution I found for that at the time was a particular 15-inch speaker I'd found crossed with 6.5-inch mid-range driver. So it was quite an odd design.
Okay.
And then I found there was a 15-inch speaker that sort of went with that, was sort of brother of that speaker, which didn't go as low, couldn't move as much air, but didn't need a mid-range driver with it. It had enough mid-range and top, so you could use that 15 on its own. So that's how the company started. We basically sold by accident, ended up making a bunch of these 15s, and it sort of just kept rolling. It was just a little side project whilst I was working in finance. And it sort of, and then there was the usual global chaos because of the joy of working in the modern world. Silly things happen because of big countries and multinational companies and all that stuff that none of us like. And we started developing our own speaker, and I was talking to the guys at Eminence saying, how can we make the best possible high accuracy bass guitar speaker? So me and Jerry McNutt at Eminence, we kicked lots of ideas back and forth, and we eventually honed in via various prototypes and ideas on a 12-inch speaker as being the solution. But it didn't have to be a 12. I just wanted to make the best high accuracy speaker using a bass cab. I mean, the nice thing about a 12 is you can get a certain amount of output out of one high accuracy 12, and then you can add a second one. You end up with a cab that goes very loud and isn't too enormous. Once you've got 115, you can't make the cab that much smaller and lighter, so you're kind of stuck, and then a 215 is that much bigger. And 10s are convenient because you can go down to 110 or 210s, but what we found was we couldn't get the tone and the performance and the accuracy out of the 10 as well as we could out of a 12.
Right.
So that's why we have a 12 in our range. It is our attempt to make the most high accuracy bass guitar speaker possible. So there's a whole range based off that, and the Big Baby 3 and the Big Twin 3 are the current super high accuracy ones, and then we have some others where we're compromising a bit on accuracy to make the cab smaller or lighter or convenient, or that sort of vibe. Our 10s, on the other hand, was then us saying, well, all the stuff we learnt from those 12s, how can we have the same benefits in sensitivity, so efficiency, and dispersion that we managed to sort out with the 12s, and extended treble response, because our speakers go much higher than you'd expect for speakers that can move air like they can. They're quite.
That was the first thing that stood out when I was in the bass gallery comparing a few speakers, and I plugged yours in, same volume, same amp, everything, and it was like, oh, okay, I need to turn down a bit, or
So we were like, how can we apply those things we've learned that make the 12s function really well in the real world, but how can we make them sound kind of warmer and fatter, and just get a colour that works for a lot of the bassists who want a coloured bass sound. And it ended up that a 10 was the way to do that rather than a 15. It just happened to be. So it does have, our 10-inch speakers do have an air of the SVT 810 speaker, but they have a bit more detail in the top. They're a bit less barky, honky in the mids, and they're a bit bigger and fatter in the lows, but you can shape it into a very similar place. They'll sit in a similar place in the mix. They go really well with, like, say, a P bass with a pick and an overdriven SVT, but they'll also do your sort of old school sounds. And then we noticed if you don't have so many of those 10s, the more of the 10s you add, the more like it's coming at you, big rock, thunderous sound. But when you go down to something where there's only one 10, the fact that it's almost like the coloration backs off,
right? Okay.
And it just starts to almost end up a bit like a sort of loudness curve, where it's just dipping the mids a bit and bumping the highs and lows a bit, and it just go, actually that's a nice vibe for a sort of lower volume alternative. And they happen to overdrive really nicely.
Way. And we were talking about that earlier, as far as having, because I've got this one, right?
Super Mini T.
Yeah, and like we were talking about combining or stacking. Like your preference would be to not stack maybe a 10 with a 12 because they got slightly different tones.
It's really it's more that the 12s is designed to be really linear, so you turn up louder and louder and louder, and it just gets louder. Unless you've got a really, really powerful amp, and then eventually you'll reach the limit of the 12. But you're talking like 600, 800 watts per 12 to get to kind of
loud gigs.
Yeah, and then when it reaches the limits, it's not very pretty. I mean, it's not the end of the world, it's not like digital clipping. But you very much go, oh, that's it. That's as far as it'll go. But it's hardly ever that I hear anyone telling me they've reached that limit. Because you wouldn't normally, because you'd be like, well, clearly I'm pushing that too hard when you still haven't got to the limit. Our 10s, on the other hand, because the cone's very light and flexible, the cone starts flexing and adding coloration as you push it harder.
That's so interesting.
So it keeps pumping air, but it starts growling a bit.
Yeah.
A bit like the way some guitar speakers growl.
Again, in a pleasant way, though.
It's a nice growl. It's a nice growl. It starts growling a bit, and then it starts sort of roaring, and eventually, when it's absolute full tilt, you feel like you're playing Sabbath through it. It's really lovely. It actually gets a bit darker. It gets growly and darker at its limit. Wow, but that's still long before you're toasting anything or you're damaging anything. And so the thing is, if you're running the 10 and the 12 together, the 12's going to keep sounding the same, and the 10's going to start breaking up in these different ways. And I've not done enough experimenting to see how that works together. Yeah. Because they're going to sort of diverge from each other. So you might have your tone dialed in perfectly for the mix of the two, quietly, and then you crank up.
And then you crank it up a bit, and then it's like, what is it? The tone starts to change.
Your tone's changing, particularly because when you've got two different sound sources, they interact. And if their phase response is changing, so that's where they start.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you go non-linear, it's not just the frequency response that's changing, it's the phase response.
And that's when you get running.
So then things might... So you might be like, oh, well, when the 10 is cranked, it's adding all this mid-range from this growl, but you might find that mid-range growl's actually sucking about a bit of mid-range out of the 12. I don't know, because I haven't messed with it.
Yeah. Crazy.
I just don't like unpredictability, you know?
No, yeah.
I also know that... Has anyone ever played a gig where they don't get louder than the soundcheck volume at some point? You know?
Yeah, we'll keep this on the down low. Don't tell the sound engineers. Yeah, but no, I mean, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, interesting.
Because I will say, as a musician, I don't like thinking about gear.
Not when you're playing, no.
No.
Yeah.
It's awful. It's awful. It's like thinking about your bike when you're riding it. As a mountain biker, the last thing you want to do is start thinking about your bike when you're chucking it down a steep hill and hitting a jump, and you just need to that if you've got that engineering bit of brain, you don't want to be using that bit of brain when you're doing something like music or mountain biking or whatever. It's different.
You just want something that's reliable,
feeling,
it sounds
and it's quick. You want you don't want to be thinking.
Yeah.
You want to be feeling.
Yeah.
And as soon as the thinking bit interferes. And if you're having to do thinking, it should be thinking about the fact that someone's just asked you to play a song you don't know and you're working off a chord chart. That's the bit of thinking that's valid. But not the thinking, do I need to turn my bass knob down because something's sounding different to how it was earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, the inconsistency will make you pay attention to the gear, and then you're not listening to the musicians, and it's extra. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Then you lose the groove.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And that is the end of the world.
That is the end of the world. Just give up at that point.
Someone wrote in, my bass amp is buzzing on gigs, what should I check? What do you think could be the error, or is there a few things? It could be cables.
Grounding. Grounding is often an issue with buzz. Grounding or interference. You get electromagnetic interference, particularly in modern gear, where you've got switch mode power supplies kick out a lot of annoying stuff. Like all this stuff that used to happen a lot with, like, say, all the beer fridges in a venue.
Right.
You know, and that then sends dirty electricity back into the mains. You know, so those sort of fridges are a problem. And fluorescent lights be a problem. But now I think it's a lot more in, like, switch mode power supplies. So, like, like phone chargers used to be big, heavy, warm things, and now they're small, light things.
Yeah.
Well, those big, heavy, warm things just had a little transformer in it running at 50 hertz. Those small, light things have a tiny transformer and a whole switching thing, and they like run at really high frequencies, and that kicks out all this buzz of noise that then heads off into the world. And it's not meant to. There are legal limits on this stuff, and you're meant to design stuff so it doesn't interact, but invariably it does at some point.
So how would you combat that then? How would you
That's quite difficult.
Issue? It could just be the venue.
Try plugging it in somewhere else.
Yeah.
Try connecting stuff up differently.
Or maybe having it directly into...
I mean, single coil pickups are a nightmare for all sorts of things.
Well,
it's not
that.
I was going to say we bassists aren't so plagued with it as guitarists, because either if your jazz bass is being annoying, you just have to run both pickups all the way up, and then they cancel pretty well. There's loads of us on Pete basses or Stingrays or anything with humbuckers, but it's not as bad as Guitar World, where there's a lot more people on Telecasters and Strats and stuff, and just P90 things, buzzy, annoying things. Oh, well, the other thing, actually, if stuff's buzzing, be really quick with your... I suppose if the buzz is coming from the amp, you can't do much about it.
Yeah.
If the buzz is coming from the rest of your rig, be just very quick with your tuner pedal in between songs and on quiet moments.
Yeah.
And just mute at critical moments.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to hear the buzz when you're all playing loud.
No, if it's like a light hum or light buzz. Yeah. That was the other thing, actually, people were talking about, is tilting the cab so they can hear it. Or you get these actual, like, amp or cab stands, don't you, that you can put them on and then tilt them. I mean, how does that affect?
So we've put a lot of work into helping the dispersion of our speakers, because for some reason, and I wonder if this is getting worse in the modern world, I have some theories on this, or hypotheses. The world is three-dimensional. We live in three dimensionals. Yeah. Sound is incredibly three-dimensional.
Yeah.
When you talk to someone in a room, even this far away, you're probably hearing more of my voice heading around the room and coming back to you than you're hearing my voice. Yeah. I mean, it's often about sort of 20-80, 20% direct and 80% reflected sound.
Well, actually, you were just playing earlier, and I was like, which one is it coming from?
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't
exactly. Tell. So sound is very much a thing that works in three dimensions. For some reason, people don't think about this. Yeah. And I do wonder if the fact that we now work on screens, which are two-dimensional things, so much of the time, and when we record music, we see our sound as a wiggly line on the computer screen, and we think that's the sound. Yeah. But that's not. That wiggly line is just a snapshot of the sound recorded by whatever it's been recorded with, whether it's a multitude of mics or just one mic. But if it's just one mic, it's just the sound that's hitting that mic at that point, and that sound is a combination of all the other sound sources in the room. So when it comes, and we all know that if you're standing in front of a PA system, if you step to the side, it gets less bright. If you stand behind it, you just hear the low end. This is not a surprise. We all know this, but we seem to forget about this when we're thinking about gear. And it's the same with our gear. If we stand behind a cab, you can't really hear it properly. Yeah. So things are directional. So with our bass cabs, we've put a lot of work, and our speakers, we've put a lot of work into making them as wide dispersion as possible.
Because also sound engineers sometimes mic it up. I'm not an expert, but like on axis, off
on
axis,
axis.
all of that.
Often, like I say, 15 degrees off axis is a great point for micing stuff, because you tend to get an on-axis peak, which is a bit unrealistic.
Right.
But actually, the sound you'll hear is the summing of all the on and off axis response plus all the reflections in the room. Yeah. So mic stuff a bit off axis is more close to it. With our guitar cabs, we do this stuff where we have this thing called an AVD, which takes the sound off the back and sort of diffracts it and sends it round the room, so you hear it much more evenly. We tried that with the bass cabs, and essentially it took away a bit of immediacy and focus and added too much reverb essentially,
Right.
which is quite an interesting thing that you hardly ever play guitar without a bit of reverb, and the
Yeah,
AVD works really well with
But
that.
bass you don't.
But bass,
generally.
you kind of want much more focus, but you do want, I'd say you want sort of, with guitar you almost want omnidirectional out, but with bass I feel you want sort of a big 90-degree wide sort of thing, and that will fill a space.
Yeah.
So there is occasionally moments when you will need to point a cab at your ears or elevate a cab to get it closer to your ears so you're more on axis, but you shouldn't have to do that very often with ours. It will happen more when you're in really loud bands with dense mixes. It will happen more if you're not good at frequency slotting around each other.
Does the stage affect that as well? Because there's like
Small stages
there's
are a
hollow
pain.
stages.
Hollow stages, that's definitely a low frequency annoyance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and particularly if you end up with a sort of low frequency blurriness, then it can be harder to lock on to the rest of your tone. You know, if you can feel your sound stopping and starting through your body and through the air immediately, then you tend to then be able to, your brain will then be able to pick out the mids and treble that's in the mix that goes with it. Whilst if your lows are kind of disassociated with the rest of your sound, it's much harder, I think, for your brain to go, oh, that's my bass sound. That's where I am. There's my notes. Yeah, it's. I would really
raise it up, maybe. No.
I think there's a lot to be said for in rehearsals and in sound checks and stuff, bothering to move stuff occasionally and just taking note of what it does and learning from it. Like I've been trying to think about how to get people to use amps better. And I thought the universal guide for how to use gear properly is to set all the knobs at 0 or 12 o'clock, whatever is kind of the most even normal sound, and then play. And turn one knob.
Tweak until it,
and learn how that knob does things, and then put that back to 0 and do another knob. And just do that until you know it in your head. And it's as simple as that.
I mean, that's my default on a gig. You know, being a player, not knowing so much of this tech stuff is, everything's default, everything's 12 o'clock, and then tweak as needed, basically.
Yeah. But if you've already kind of got your brain programmed with what the knobs do, then it's so easy to tweak.
It's like if I hear muddiness, I'm like, okay, I need to do this. Like that
because you've got that.
You learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I was getting annoyed with my pedal board situation because it's a bit out of control. So started looking into. I've decided I don't want to start another project. I've got this sort of, I don't know, slightly prog alt rock bass drums vocal thing, but life keeps getting in the way of us getting an album down. And then I was starting to think I want to start a funk project. So I started writing and arranging some stuff and getting the hang of funk guitar.
Isn't it?
I was like, I need a different phaser pedal. I need something funky.
Yeah.
And then I got another phaser pedal, which turned out to be completely mad. It's the Warm Audio one that Larry. It's like a copy of the Roland Jet phase. It's just too mad with a hot bass like this into it. It's so fuzzy and insane, but it is quite cool.
He loves all of that as well. Isn't he?
It's also about this big.
Yeah.
It's so I started experimenting more with my Grand Orbiter phaser, and I was like, oh, do you know what? The substitute. Don't buy gear. Fiddle with the gear you already own. Figure it all out. Figure out all the things it can do. And I'd say that about basses, really. Not many basses don't have a lot of knobs, but do move the knobs. And then once you've moved the knobs, put the knobs back to where they were, and just start moving your hand around.
I mean, it's way more. I mean, you know, we can talk about all of this, but definitely like the placement of when you're playing here or here.
Yeah,
that can affect the sound.
Oh my god! I mean, and I as a bassist, I'll go from, if I'm playing chordal stuff, I might be back here, right back there, and then I might be going.
Yeah.
And I might be palm muting.
Yeah.
Or what? Using the finger fake pick.
Yeah.
Or
that's the burner.
Or the clatter.
Yeah.
Or just the.
Yeah.
You know. Or you can also slap as well. You know. So I've been doing more as well. Do you realise you can go? So palm muting fingers and thumb?
Yeah, the fingers something. It's also interesting how like some gigs I'll play and I'll be like, oh, this room doesn't sound good for like slap or something, or like kind of just part. Like this is more of like a.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is more like a palm muting gig, or like I'll adjust the sound I'm kind of hearing in my head to the room as well. I think
this is why I like a rig that's really honest and dynamic, because then my hands get to play more.
Yeah.
You can shape much more of the sound
Yeah.
from yourself.
Instead of having a rig that has its thing, but it's only good for that thing. Is
Well,
that
I mean,
something-
the SVT 810,
Oh, we were talking about this.
it's a very good trick, but it's one trick.
Like a one pony
I-
thing. Yeah.
I mean, we had one here on loan for a while, and I've used them before, and the SVT is an epic amp, and I can see why it was so popular and
It's
why it
almost like a
remains popular.
standard at
Because it was the
festivals.
first
Yeah.
properly loud bass amp, and then when you put it on the 810, it's the first properly loud, reliable bass rig. There was the Acoustic 360. I don't know why that died out, whether they just went bust. You know the one Jacko used?
No.
Oh, so the Acoustic 360 or 361 is, it looks kind of like an 810 rig. There's a head on top of a sort of 810 size cab. It's actually a rear folded 18, so it's got an 18-inch speaker with a magnet at the front firing backwards, like a reggae sound system, but mid bass bin.
Wow.
So it's
Real,
so it's 118 fires backwards and out through these grills, top and bottom, and then the power amp is actually in the bottom of it. There's a 200-watt power amp, so it's an active cab.
wow.
And then it's got the thing on the top that looks like the amp is actually just a preamp. Jacko used it.
Oh, really?
John Paul Jones used it.
Oh,
Jacko
wow.
just was like, this is part of my sound.
Yeah,
And once
yeah.
he got one, he always hauled that everywhere along with his jazz bass, and that's part of the Jacko sound, which I
Right,
think is why
yeah.
he plugged right back here by the bridge so much of the time, because
he had such
such a big boomy sound from the cab, but then
Interesting,
the nasal growly bridge
Yeah.
pickup thing, and it combined together to make that epic sound, which you don't really hear on, say, Weather Report, but Invitation, that live album, you really get the Jacko sound.
Yeah.
But John Paul Jones used them live,
Oh, wow.
and Led Zeppelin.
That'd be
So
huge sounds, yeah.
yeah, it was an epic cab, but the SVT and the 810 is what is the one that then, I think Acoustic
Kind of
went bust.
overtook.
That must have been it. But anyway, they continued on, and it's loud and reliable, and it sits
Yeah.
a bit like the way the P bass sits in the mix in the right
Yeah.
place. The SVT 810 sits in the mix in the right place, and I think possibly in the world of rock, when you've got people playing, particularly when you've got guitarists turned bassist. If you get someone who's not actually that good at playing bass and they've moved across from guitar, and give them a P bass with a pick and an SVT and an 810, they'll make the right sound and they'll sit in the mix. And they won't really get in anyone's way, and it'll just do the right thing.
Which
and it'll be loud enough.
sometimes was the case,
Which is-
particularly back in the day. A lot of, bass players were guitarists. And,
Well, I mean, Geezer Butler was.
there's so many.
Yeah, and he's,
Interesting.
I've suddenly forgotten all the other bassists who were guitarists first, but there's so many.
Yeah.
There's so many. Well, McCartney was.
Yeah, McCartney, in the Hendrix trio. As
Oh,
well.
that's the other one I was thinking of, Noel Redding.
Yeah.
That's because he had the hair.
Yeah, he had
got
that.
the
That's right.
But yeah. But the 810 cab, I find deeply frustrating. People like and buy. I can see why, but I find them boomy and muddy, and the amp kind of sorts the cab out. That pairing, they sort each other out. The
Yeah.
amps do sound really great.
But it
for a certain
seems
sound.
like all. I want to say all. I don't know all, but definitely most of the festival shows I've done, that's what's there. And
Well,
it
the
seems
other
like
thing
the
that's
production
quite nice
companies
with an
get that.
810 is the speakers are wired all in parallel, and there's 8 of them in an Ampeg 810. And if you blow one, the other 7 keep working.
Right.
I don't know how many of them have got all the speakers working, because even if you've only got 6 working or 5 working, it's still quite loud.
Yeah.
So it's quite a nice, reliable thing. And
Yeah.
the impedance will change a bit, obviously, but the amp won't care that much. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it still works,
Just
which is
works.
at the end of the day what you need. Yeah.
It works. And they look good. They look epic on stage.
Yeah.
But they look epic, but they don't look as big as a Marshall double stack. So I think guitarists like that. That the
Yeah.
bass rig is loud
It's
and
an
powerful,
ego
but
thing.
it doesn't look as big as the guitar rig.
We've got to talk
Historically,
about
they've got
look as
smaller.
well. haven't we?
No one goes to hear a band. People only go to see a band. That's what you say. I'm going to see a band.
I guess so. Yeah.
You don't go say I'm going to go and hear a band, or do you?
Yeah.
You
I
listen
guess-
to a band on a CD or whatever people listen
Yeah.
to nowadays, but you go see a band. So
And
it
you've
has
got to
look
get the
good.
amp that suits the vibe and the music as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. Ah,
Rock and
cool.
roll. As I said
Yeah.
to the council, we're in the business of rock and roll. We can't move to many of the places around here because they are not sufficiently rock and roll.
They're not rock
We have
and
to
roll
stay in
enough.
Brighton.
A question here: series versus parallel. What's the difference, and how does that whole thing kind of work?
If you've got an amp and you've got 2 cabs you want to use with it, and you plug a cable from amp to one cab and another cable from the amp to the other cab, they're in parallel.
Yeah.
If you daisy chain, so you go amp to the first cab and then first cab to the second cab, they're still in parallel.
Yeah.
That's how they're wired. It's just parallel wiring. To put the speakers in series requires making a weird cable, which says, unless you know what you're doing, you're not going to do that. Or you buy a series box, and then that combines with a bunch of cables to kind of make a series cable. So
basically, most of the time it's parallel.
They're always parallel.
Yeah.
When you talk about series and parallel wiring in a cab, sometimes with guitar stuff you'll wire things in series inside the cab. So you might put 2 8-ohm speakers in series for 16 ohms, but that's because, say, a Marshall amp wants to run an 8-ohm load or a 16-ohm load. It doesn't want to run a 4-ohm load because it's only got an 8-ohm tap and a 16-ohm output tap. But bass amps tend to be the other way. They tend to, if they are valve, they go towards lower impedance.
Right.
Or normally your bass cabs are either 4 or 8 ohms generally.
Generally the ones.
And the smaller ones tend to be 8 ohms, so then you get 2 of them.
Yeah.
And then it's 4 ohms, and pretty much every amp out there is happy at 4 ohms, so you don't have to think about it. Pickups, on the other hand, you can put them in series or parallel.
Yes. And that
so
does
jazz
change.
bass is wired in parallel, 2 pickups in parallel. We had a customer in here fairly recently, and he had I can't think which model of jazz bass it was, but it was really neat. It had a push button in the middle of one of the pots. It wasn't a push-pull pot. It was like the lid of the pot. The top of the knob went in, and when you push that in, it put his jazz pickups in series.
Just like that.
And when you put 2 pickups in series, you gain output, you lose a bit of clarity. So you end up with a sort of darker, louder sound, which is really cool. So a P bass, or the Mustang likewise, that has got 2 coils in series. That's the sound. That's how it's wired. Whilst the Stingray has 2 coils in parallel, brighter, clearer.
Yeah.
You know, whilst the 2 in series tends to be a bit more low mid-range, a bit less top end.
I mean, this has got a high output. Like when I turn it on, you know, if I'm playing this and then I go and pick up like one of my other basses, like this just seems to have.
So even though that's a tiny little pickup, it's a loud pickup as well.
Yeah.
To show,
It's a loud bass.
Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, someone asked, lightweight versus heavy cabs. Does it affect the sound? Obviously, the advantage of a lighter cab is, you know, you're not doing your back in, but does it affect the sound, or is that kind of all?
The weight isn't what matters. What matters is the rigidity of the cab. So a Formula One car is very stiff, very rigid, very hard to flex. You know, compared to say a normal family car, which family cars, if you ever crack on in a car on a bendy road, you'll feel your car flex as you're hauling it around a corner, and then when you hit a bump in the middle of a corner. Formula One car is super stiff, but a Formula One car, the chassis weighs nothing.
Yeah.
You know, absolutely nothing. A bare chassis of Formula One car is probably like 100 kilos or something of just carbon fibre. They're so rigid but so light.
Yeah.
Whilst a family car's actual monocoque chassis, I don't know, 500 kilos or something. There's a lot of steel in them, and they're full of holes, which makes them bendy. That's why. You know. Anyway, I shan't diverge onto cars, but if you want to make a cab stiff, the cheap way to make it stiff and rigid and non-resonant is to use thick bits of plywood. The downside of that is it's heavy.
Yeah, okay.
So what we've done, because when I started Barefaced, it was more one of those sort of intellectual challenges, like people being like, well, everyone says they have to be heavy. Why do they have to be heavy? And the speaker I was looking to use at Barefaced happened to have a neo magnet, because that got the accuracy we wanted, because neo magnets essentially are better at being magnets than ceramic or Alnico magnets. They do a better job of just producing a nice constant magnetic field. So they're lower coloration inherently. So I was like, well, I've got a lightweight magnet. Why do I need to use thick bits of wood? Why don't I use thin bits of plywood and then brace them? So essentially, instead of having a box with 6 sides, you have a box where there's cross braces and ribs and just reinforcements all over the place. Like if you've ever seen, what was the bomber? Was it the Lancaster bomber or the Wellington? One of the World War II bombers, literally made out of wood. But it's just, and wood doesn't seem like a good thing to make airplanes out of, but if you're short of aluminium because you're in World War II, if you use lots of bits of wood cleverly joined together so it cross braces, you end up with something that's strong and light. So, yeah, down now, there's, since I've been running Bareface for 16 years, so it's a while now. There's a lot of lightweight cabs out there now. Quite a lot of lightweight cabs out there, because I tend to, if I encounter them in shops, I go around knocking on them and being like, well, I can see why that's lightweight.
So what are they made out of then?
They're just, what you do, if you want to make a cab light and less expensive, is you brace it less. And then people try it in a shop and like, oh, it sounds fine. And then they play it at a gig and are like, oh, it doesn't sound as good as my heavy cab did because it doesn't slam as hard.
Right.
Because it's not stiff enough once you've actually got it cranked up.
So
It'll be fine quieter.
That's the problem, not the actual
Yeah,
weight.
and we were talking about some brands earlier, and I remember when you mentioned that one, I was thinking, I remember seeing the adverts where they said the first lightweight cab without compromise, and me being quite annoyed because I was making really good lightweight cabs at that point. And then I encountered one, and I knocked on it and thought, oh, that's quite boomy, those panels. And then I stuck my arm inside the port and had a feel of the speaker, like James Herriot, if anyone gets that reference. And it was like, oh, and there's quite a feeble little speaker in there. So it's not a lightweight cab without compromise, but it is a good marketing campaign.
Well, there's a lot there, isn't there? When you're looking at, like, as a player, all of these things, like we talked about, the ohms, the watts, the whatever, and then there's all this marketing stuff as well. It's hard to find.
I will say,
then there's Reddit.
it's really hard making things that are light and strong and stiff, because you can't make them with machines. We use a CNC machine like for cutting the plywood in really complicated shapes, but at the end of the day there's just a lot of labour, a lot of slotting things together, getting all the glue in the right place, getting the clamp in the right places. Yeah, if I tried to pitch this business to Dragon's Den, they'd tell me to go away because clearly it's not going to make enough money. So, yeah, we make very loud furniture and it has to look really nice as well.
It has to look nice.
It has to look really nice as well. So it's hard to make stuff that looks nice and goes loud and is bomb-proof so people can still be using it in many years' time. Yeah. And I don't find myself fielding emails with people saying it's broken. Because generally, I occasionally get an email from someone going, I'm looking to buy a new cab. I've been using my Bareface one for the last 15 years for every gig. And I'm like, oh, this is what we're here for. And it's still good, and he's going to pass it on to someone else. So,
because they have to deal with different temperatures, like depending on the gig, like you're throwing it in the car or not literally throwing it.
And we sell internationally. About 3/4 of what we sell nowadays goes overseas, straight to customers the other side of the world. So it has to be bomb-proof, because if it isn't, it has to survive the shipping there. Obviously it's sent insured, so occasionally once in a blue moon something will get damaged and then we have to get it back and fix it and deal with the insurance claim. But it has to be tough. And people have to have the confidence that our stuff keeps working. What's quite nice now is we've been doing this a long time. People go, oh yeah, that Bareface stuff, it's good.
Oh, that's how I heard about you. Yeah. When I was saying, I was in Camden with Scott and Ian the other day, and they were raving about the cabs, because mine, I wasn't super satisfied with mine, and then it actually broke on a gig a few days ago. So now I'm here, and then that's why I got introduced to you, and I was comparing it at the Bass Gallery, like the different cabs that they had there, and kind of blew me away. Like literally though, when I turned it on, I was like, whoa, this one is like exactly the same, cab, 112, and it was the one down there.
The Super Mini T, as it got renamed.
Yeah, oh right,
it was the Super Midget, but then a few people didn't like the fact that they said that word was, I can't remember the word for it. Anyway, we're not using the word. But also, it was also confusing because the Super Midget was the only one with a tweeter in our Super range that didn't have a T at the end of the name.
Oh, okay.
So because it used to be that we made the Super Twin, the Super Compact without tweeters, and then the Super Midget had a tweeter because it was a small cab with a tweeter. And then we started doing a Super Twin T and a Super Compact T, so it didn't really make sense having a Super Midget without a T in it, so it became the Super Mini and the Super Mini T, so you can have it without a tweeter, so it's kind of,
Well, for people that don't know, could you explain what the tweeter does and how that...
So on our bass cabs, the 12s, I'll grab this is a guitar speaker, but it's quite useful, instructive, because guitar speakers are made a bit like some of our bass speakers. You've essentially got the cone that produces most of the sound, and then you've got the dust cap, which is this weird little dome in the middle, and that helps with all the sound because it's all moving together. But actually, on our bass cabs, the dust cap is actually coupled to the voice coil former, so that is actually moving with the voice coil, and then the voice coil is kind of moving the cone. And once you get to very high frequencies, the cone kind of gets left behind. The cone ends up being too heavy.
So if you're playing bass, you mean like kind of the higher?
I don't mean the high notes, I mean the top end of your notes.
As in like, yeah, the top end of the higher notes. So...
Well, top end of your bottom notes as well. Just that.
Right, oh, really?
You know, that.
Just the more the twang. Yeah.
Yeah, and that. You know, the all that stuff, that detail.
Particularly if you're
finger
on
on string.
Stingray
or something like that.
Yeah.
That, what happens is those very fast vibrations of the voice coil, they just happen too quickly for the heavy cone to move with it, but they will move the dust cap on its own because the dust cap's joined to the voice coil and then there's a glue joint on our designs to the cone. Most bass cabs aren't like this. I don't know anyone else who does bass guitar drivers like this. Everyone else glues the dust cap onto the cone so they kind of move together. With us, we glue the dust cap. It makes it much more expensive to make the drivers. We glue the dust cap onto the voice coil and the voice coil and also the voice coil separately to the cone.
Interesting.
So essentially the joint between the voice coil and the cone it basically acts as a low pass filter at like sort of 4 kilohertz on the 12s and about 6 kilohertz on our 10s. Wow. And then at high frequencies, our dust cap in the middle is producing high frequency output up to about 10 kilohertz, which is high. But that's quieter because it's only a small radiating area. So the cone's a big thing. The dust cap's just this little dome in the middle. It's a 3-inch dome on the 12s and it's a 2-inch dome on the 10s.
Okay.
So
by turning it off and turning it on...
Well, this is not the tweeter. So if you hear one of our cabs with a 12 or a 10, you will hear the 12s roll off at 4 kilohertz or so smoothly. The 10s roll off at about 6 kilohertz. But if you crank the treble, there's a whole load of extra treble, just quieter, running between that 4-6 kilohertz thing up to about 10 kilohertz, so you can get extra output from the dust cap.
Right.
So there's all this brightness available. I can demonstrate in a sec.
Usually you're missing.
Yeah. Usually you're missing, but it's there. Now, with our tweeter, the tweeter comes in on our cabs at somewhere between about 2 and 4 kilohertz, depending on where you've got the knob on the back set, the high frequency control. But the tweeter's then coming in to do very clean highs, so very uncoloured, low distortion from that sort of 2 to 4 kilohertz region up as far as your ears go. You know, unless you're a small child, the tweeter will go higher than your ears can. We use 2 different tweeters. We've got one which is larger, wider dispersion, very low coloration with neomagnet on it, and then we've got one which is, it's really nice as bass cab tweeters go, but it's more of a normal sounding tweeter. So that's the one that's in these cabs down here. The Big Baby 3 and the Big Twin 3 have the massive thing that looks a bit like a PA horn. Which is very clean and clear, and I like that a lot. But yeah, so the tweeter's there to bring in that detail. But it's an interesting thing with that. A lot of people don't like bass cab tweeters because they just don't sound that great. Usually when tweeters don't sound that great, a lot of it's because the crossover's not very good. So the crossover's the electrical circuit that separates off the frequencies that are hitting the tweeter and shapes the sound of the tweeter. So we've got quite a complicated crossover that we designed ourselves. So we measured the tweeter electrically, we measured it on and off axis at lots of different angles, we measured the woofer on and off axis at lots of angles, and then put that into a bit of software and essentially started doing different models of different components and adjusting component values, and then you make a real one and test it. It's the thing that hi-fi speaker designers will be like, that's what takes the longest. Once you've figured out your speakers, then... And we designed the 12-inch speaker kind of in unison with that process, so that the 12 would roll off where we wanted it to match to the tweeter.
So it's slightly different to the 10.
It's really... And then the 10 fortuitously seemed to happen to work quite well with the tweeter. It wasn't originally planned to have a tweeter, so our 10-inch cabs didn't have tweeters for years. And then we were like, well, people keep asking us, let's try it. And we're like, oh, this sounds a lot better than I was expecting.
Be cool. Can we hear the difference?
Yeah.
Maybe.
So
what are you plugged in?
I am absolutely clean through an Stingray.
So I have no idea.
Avalon U5. I've got the origin board down here, but that's all bypassed.
Okay.
EQ's flat on there.
So
okay, let me turn the tweeter off on this.
Well, yeah. If I go back there.
Yes.
And see.
No, I'm going to have to.
Okay, so yeah, it's off now. And then if I turn it on, if I just go the other way. It's interesting because, like, being here
And
as
you're
well,
behind, so you're what you're hearing is the tweeter being kicked off around the room and reflecting back at you, because the tweeter's not sending any sound backwards.
Yeah.
But
you
so
can
that's
feel
tweeter on
it
and
more.
off.
It feels.
And if we leave the tweeter off, try turning the treble knob. That's that one there as I play.
Yeah.
I'll play that same part again.
That's treble out.
Yeah, and you hear it sort of flat in the middle. You've got that. So that's, and then.
Yeah.
So it's bringing a lot of detail in the top end.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Detail.
But can you see that? You see that? Can you see how
Yeah.
it looks different to other bass cabs? Can you see these sort of
It's like
black
a rim,
gooey marks? That's normally, so that's where the voice coil wires enter. They come from the terminals and they go through the. You've got these tinsel leads. They go through the cone and then round and into the voice coil.
Yeah.
Right. Normally, they make the dust cap big and hide those gluey marks underneath it, and so the dust cap gets glued across the cone. We let you see them because by letting you see them, then we can glue the dust cap straight onto the voice coil, so you get that detail coming through the dust cap. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, it's great. So, as a player, when would you decide to have it on or off, or would you kind of?
Trust your ears.
It's based on the. On your
I mean,
preference.
I've found that in my band, using two big baby threes for rehearsal in this room, which is a very overkill rig, but actually we do get quite loud and I'm using a lot of pedals and filling a lot of sound. I've ended up having the bottom cab tweeter like halfway up and the top cab tweeter pretty much on full, but that's because I don't have a guitarist and the singer needs me to fill as much space as possible. It helps her pitch off me and when playing chords, all that top end. But often I would then, it doesn't sound as pretty. I would rather, tonally, have it backed off a bit more.
Okay.
But it's
the
works
sonic
functionally in the
space
mix.
is
Absolutely.
there. Well, it's like, I actually prefer a lot playing my P-Bass and my Mustang in a guitar trio, because sonically it just like really fits a lot better than, but when I go and play this, or my P-Bass, and there's keys there, like keys can really take up a lot of sonic space.
Especially their left hand.
Especially,
Tight behind
bloody
the
left
back.
hand. Yeah. Or if they're using like a Rhodes sound that really fills out. And
I do love a Rhodes though.
Like, I know I do as well, but it really pads.
That's why I've got
out
a tremolo
the sound.
pedal on there. I play
to emulate that.
play chords through a tremolo pedal and I feel like I'm playing a Rhodes with only 4 fingers.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's cool. I think the only last question was that was written on there was active and passive speakers. So this one is a powered amp, right?
Yeah.
Down here.
This is a thing that we've come at because it's from our guitar end of things, but we've been working on a bass amp. This is insane. Since 2017.
Wow.
Yes, I know. There's quite a few prototypes now in the other room, so the end is nigh.
17 was that like 7 years?
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
What?
Why has it taken so long to?
Well, some companies. I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not an electronic engineer, and some companies, there's quite a lot of companies out there that are marketing companies, and there are quite a lot of companies that are design and marketing companies. We are a R&D and design and manufacturing and marketing and sales business, and there's like less than 10 of us here. So we do everything, and when we start trying to do something that we don't know how to do necessarily, like designing an entire amp, it just takes a long time. Also, we know that we're making arguably the best bass cabs in the world, and we've got a really good reputation, so the amp has to be amazing.
Yeah, to release something. Right?
And then my plan was, well, there's quite a lot of amps out there already. Let's make the absolute baddest amp ever.
Yeah.
So we started off with like this ridiculous kind of flagship bit of lunacy, which is still there in the pipeline. But good Lord, it's complicated. I mean, it's got like 4 buttons on the foot switch, and it's got 2 channels and dirt, and there's all sorts of stuff. It's like an entire bi-amp rig in one.
What can you share about it so far?
But basically, quite a few things came to pass. We were like, we've got some an FR guitar cab, so a modelling guitar cab. And we're like, people use them, and it got some really good feedback from people. But there was a general, we need an active one of these. We were like, well, let's just take the front end of the bass amp, tie it together with a lower power amp.
Yeah.
Put that in a guitar cab, so we can work in all our guitar cabs or our modelling guitar cab. And that's the activier. So we came up with this very neat plate amp solution that we can fit to all our guitar stuff. And then someone was asking us, I really want a small active bass cab. And we were like, well, let's see if it works. No, we tried powering it off that. Yeah. So that's what happened. We did some testing. We're like, you know what? This amp's got a lot more oomph than we thought. We knew it would sound good in terms of the front end, but we didn't know if the power stage would have enough oomph to do bass. It turned out to match really well with the 110. So hence, and the design of that, it self-cools. There's no fan, but it's got the hybrid resonator cab design. The cab's divided internally. And there's an internal port and an external port, so they
pick it up.
Yeah. They resonate at 2 different frequencies, and it once you crank it up, air moves in and out of there, and helps cool the module. So there's no fan, but it cools itself from the port air.
So you don't get that loud
no fan
noise. Yeah.
No, we crank that really hard, and it's this at the most gets slightly warm, you know.
And it's light. It's something. Because I came here looking for something that I could take to like kind of small London type venues, like little members clubs type things, you know, maybe 80 to 60 people in a room, kind of private events and things. And having this, I mean, you're talking about having a cajon case?
Yeah, apparently there's cajon, they tend to, the 110 fits in a cajon bag.
Which is very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can have your bass, have this, maybe have a couple of pedals or something, and then you're sorted. That's so cool.
I mean, for me, with like an active bass, I've got all the EQ I need there.
To be
honest, with the tweeter controls, if you got one, you can do that without a tweeter. But if you got the one with the tweeter, tweeter knob and a passive bass, tweeter switches and a passive bass, I'd be fine.
And then you can also. It's also got a little...
Yeah, this one's got a pole mount on it, so that's a customization on them, so you can pole mount them and use them as a tiny PA system. You've got 2 of them in stereo, which is what the first owner, who's a guy in Denmark, has. He has them in custom Tolex as a little PA system.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly why. It was some complicated multi-instrumentalist setup, I think, possibly with looping and sequencers and stuff. Yeah, there was a lot going on. He's thrilled.
And then you can like... Well, could you connect this to this one?
Yeah, you could. Yeah. It's got a speak on out, so that amp will run down to 2.7 ohms quite happily. So you could run that 4 ohm cab and that off it, so you'll get 200 odd watts out of that rig.
So like for small gigs, that one.
Yeah.
Bigger gigs, and then if you want.
And then we also do that as a stereo module, so that's a mono one, but you can have one with 2 200 watt modules and 2 inputs in.
Oh, really?
So you could then daisy chain a passive one of these as stereo. So you could potentially have 2 on each side running off one.
And one of them's active, one's passive.
Well, you could have 2 on each side. You could have one active cab, which is stereo, with a passive slave underneath and another passive pair on the other side.
Right.
So it's a cool little piece of kit. But so then the bass amp is we're sort of working on a sort of compromise bass amp, which isn't insanely complicated, but it's got a lot of the features. So whereas we've got one called the Zero, which we've got pre-orders open for, which is the one that will be done first, which is really stripped back, like a power amp with very simple EQ for everyone doing modelling and wanting minimalist EQ. I mean, I don't like having a lot of EQ on an amp.
Oh, I'm pretty basic when it comes
There's enough on this bass, and then I've just got a pedal board for all the real complications. I feel my sound is in my hand. If I can't get the sound out of my hands, I'm playing the wrong instrument or the wrong gear. And then there's a slightly more complicated one coming because we wanted to fill the niche that has been left by Acoustic Image and Euphonic Audio and Walter Woods, because there's a real gap there, we feel, for double bass and bass guitar doublers. We've got a lot of customers playing our cabs for that. So, and then there'll be more high power ones and complicated ones coming. Yeah. But hopefully there'll be a flurry once we've got the first ones out, because we're doing a lot of chasing down noise and stuff, trying to make stuff really, really, really silent.
Yeah, that's
and
a big.
Honestly, it would be really fast to make an adequate amp, but to make a really, really good amp,
Oh, it's like that
Takes a
extra
while.
10, 20% is what takes the extra, you
Oh
know,
my-
5 years. Or
Yes,
something.
yes,
Yeah. It's the
yes,
small
yes.
things,
It's
isn't it?
really, really hard to
Yeah.
make stuff small and loud and light and quiet.
But
when
that's
it's not
probably
doing
that's why you
anything.
got the reputation
Yeah,
that you've
so
got.
the amps have to measure up to the cabs. So we've got a lot of people wanting them.
This
so.
may be a silly question, but I'll ask it anyway.
Yeah.
As far as having an active or passive, they don't sound any different at all. Or
No,
is it-
no.
I mean, maybe it's a little bit heavier.
Oh, fractionally, but
Yeah,
to be honest,
but
it's
it's
quite
not-
funny. You know, we take a big chunk of plywood out and then put a
Oh, so
No, it is heavier. I think
Yeah.
is it a kilo heavier? 2 pounds heavier, something like that. It's not a lot.
But there's not any difference in the tone, the sound, or anything.
No,
like that,
I mean theoretically we've lost a bit of internal volume, but it's very marginal because the module isn't in its own separate box.
Right. Okay.
So the air around all the components in there is still part of the working volume of the cab, and we're sort of working, which does mean we have to make them airtight. And we've noticed that a couple of people have ordered them with a passive input,
Okay.
which is something we do on the guitar cabs quite a bit, the active guitar cabs. So with that, because of the way it's recessed in the back, you can quite tidily have the plate amp on the back,
Okay.
and because it's in the AVD and the passive input there. And then the plate amp isn't connected internally, so if you want to use the plate amp, you have a little jumper cable between the two, because otherwise, so then you can use an external valve amp to drive the cab, or you could use the plate amp, so you can, like, say, record through your valve amp and then gig through using the internal, the active.
That's what a lot of people.
So we've done that with some 110s for people, but it's not as elegant because the lead's on the outside. But it does mean you can swap between. You could use an active. You can use it as a passive cab or an active cab.
Right. Okay. You have the option then.
Yeah.
Cool. Amazing. I think
Too many options. I think that's the one thing I've definitely concluded here.
Yeah.
We have too many options, too many customizations. So if you find yourselves on our website and go,
Yeah.
oh my God, just email us and we'll tell you what you need.
And what is the website?
And I'll be honest, I actually just sent someone an email yesterday and I thought, well, I am a very bad businessman, because he emailed me saying, I've got an old Carvin 2x15 and I've put two Eminence Caprolite 3015s in it, but I'm sure, you know, a cab from you guys would be much better, you know, and all this. And I just, you know, he was looking at a 310 and I busted out email cab going, unless that cab's really bad, two Caprolite 3015s, they're really good drivers.
No, but
I think you need a better amp,
really,
but because
so important.
he's got an Eden amp, which was Eden made some really good amps, but this is not one of their really good ones.
Right.
So I did just go, yeah, I think you're fine. Just get a better amp.
And so,
But especially as how he described his sound, he was like, oh, I'm in a doom band. And I went, because the Caprolite 3015 is what we used to use in our very first bass cabs. And I'm like, that's a good driver for some stuff. I mean, our 10CR is better for like 95% of coloured bass sounds. But when he described what he went, I went, yeah.
That's
Six
one
one,
of
half a
the-
dozen of the other, and you'd have to spend however many thousand with us to get something as good. So I was like,
yeah, that's one of the first questions you asked me. Like, what kind of stuff do you mainly do? It's quite hard if you're doing such varied stuff, but definitely the heavier rock stuff isn't generally what I'm booked to do. So I guess that's an important question.
oh,
to
it's
ask.
so important, especially when people say, how loud do I need to be? And I'm like,
I'm
know.
not particularly loud.
I mean, we've established, Louis here plays, he's leaving sadly off to become a full-time musician, but he plays a lot of these very professional gigs where there's sound level limiters, and, you know, everyone's, you know, just really good musicians, really professional outfits, and therefore very controlled in volume, depending on where they need to be. So sometimes they'll be very loud, sometimes they'll be very quiet because the venue has limits or there's a requirement.
Nowadays,
from
there's silent stages and in-ears.
Well, there's that as well.
Most of the time, yeah.
But, and when I say how many decibels I've measured out of curiosity in rehearsals for my band, or how loud Dave is getting with his band, you know, with all the looping and stuff, and he's like, and that's like, we're playing so much louder and using so much more power in a rehearsal with 3 people than he'll be playing in a band, you know, with 8 people on stage, playing a venue with 500 people in.
So it just really depends.
It's so context.
Yeah.
The music and the context.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll leave a link to your website below.
Yes,
Barefaced-
barefacedaudio.com. Yes.
barefacedaudio.com. And leave the email below for any questions as well, or they can contact you on the website.
Yeah, the email's on the website.
Email's on the
best,
website.
Or, yeah, or
Cool.
this will be on the YouTube, won't it? If
It will
they
be on
comment
the
on the YouTube,
YouTubes.
I'll spot. You can link me, and I'll
Yeah, you can put comments below, any questions.
and I'll get involved.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Nice. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this conversation, I have loads more videos just like this one on my channel, all related to music and bass. You can check out my channel here, and YouTube's going to like recommend a video here for you, so you can click that video, and I will see you there.